Okay, so here's another example of a one tent vent. And even though it's a bigger tent, nothing changes with respect to venting it. We could take up valuable floor space by putting the fan filter on the floor and recirculating the same air over and over like this, or we can duct it out of the tent like this. Either way, we're going to add CO2. And remember, if you vent like this, keep the plants between the CO2 source and the vent so they stand the best chance of absorbing it. And if you recirculate the air over and over like this, you can add CO2 anywhere. And even though we have more room in this bigger tent, believe me, when you do this right, your plants are going to fill up the entire space. And so we are back to either attaching the fan filter to the roof like this, or we're going to have to move it out of the tent. And again, if we recirculate the same air over and over like this, you can add CO2 anywhere. But if you're venting like this, always make sure to keep the plants between the vent and the CO2 source.
And while hanging the fan filter from the roof might work in a tent like this with a small hood like this, it most certainly is not going to fit with a supersized hood like this or a Nickel City light like this. Or with a kind K5 750 on a light rail light mover like this. And that's because once you step up to a real light, like the ones we're using in these bigger tents, you're going to have to vent the tent. And once you accept the fact that you are going to have to vent, well, at that point, you're also going to have to make a decision about stealth. Are you going to try to keep this project stealthy, or are you going to try to grow weed in it?
And while I totally respect that you're looking for stealth, all I'm saying is that when growing cannabis in smaller tents like these, if you don't vent properly, there is nothing stealthy about a screaming loud 100 cubic foot black tent with the sides sucked in. Now, imagine trying to grow in one of those $399 computer cases from eBay.
And even though you've been watching this video and thinking the whole time that putting the fan filter on the roof will more effectively vent the heat, it doesn't. And I know heat rises, but it doesn't matter. And later in the video, I'll show you why. And I know Sentinel makes a controller that turns off the vent fan while it's adding CO2. But the reality is, in a space like this, your light usually gets too hot to turn off your vent fan for very long. Which is why I say this is too much equipment for a vented garden like this. It is, however, just right for a big 4x8 or a 5x10 space like this, especially when you're venting your super cool bad boy T5 lights. Or in a big 5x10 space with a couple of super cool kind K5 LEDs like these. But it would not be appropriate to turn off the vent fan in a 5x10 space with a couple of 1,000-watt HIDs. So, in this space, you're either going to have to commit and buy an air conditioner and a Sentinel CO2 controller and a CO2 tank like this, which seems like a bit much. Or just let it go and use a CO2 booster, like this bottle from T&B, and it is what it is. You may not get as much as possible, but remember, quality is based on grower talent, not CO2 or your light. Besides, you're supposed to be enjoying this, right? But I'll get more into the difference in CO2 controllers later, after we go over a few more details about venting. Okay, so here's a couple of tents in a 2-light rotation. And if you remember the 2-light rotation we did back here with these little tents, well, this is the exact same thing, only this time, because we're using a bigger tent, we're also going to use bigger lights, like this 8-bulb 400-watt Bad Boy T5 for veg, and this 16-bulb Bad Boy T5 in flower, or this 400-watt Bad Boy T5 in veg with this K5 750 in flower. My point is, you would vent all these 2-light rotations just like you would vent a couple of 4x8 tents. And that's because removing the heat isn't about venting more air, or the size of the tent, or the light, or matching the CFM of the fan to the filter. There's only one thing that you should concern yourself with when it comes to venting, and that's venting the least amount of air possible. But I'll get more into that later in the video when we're going over the bigger 4x8 tents from Gorilla. So let's vent these two tents just like we vented the smaller tent. Instead of one piece of thermoflow ducting connected directly to the fan, we'll add a Y branch like this with ducting up to each tent like this. And now we're venting both tents with one fan filter again, and with only one bag of thermoflow purchased. Gotta love that. And while we're here at the 2-light rotation, I want to take some time to show you the differences between Ys like this and Ts like that and ducting, and whether or not you should blow or suck through your hood, and whether or not it makes a difference if you suck from or blow into your filter like this. Okay, so this is a 6-inch vortex fan on a 6-inch vortex filter. The fan is blowing into the filter, it's sucking from the ducting. At this end, I've attached the 666Y to 2 equal length pieces of thermoflow ducting. They're both stretched out so you can see this tape, so you can see how the smoke will get absorbed from both of them. Now, let's cut to the overhead and see how it goes. Now this is a T-branch, but we're going to test it the same way. We're going to attach it to the vortex fan with some thermoflow ducting, attach 2 pieces of equal length thermoflow ducting to it, lay them on the table or the ruler so we can use the smoke to do a flow test. Now let's cut to the overhead. Got that? And now let's test the other style of Y branch. Okay, as long as we're here, let's go over a couple of things about thermoflow ducting and branches like this. Because this stuff is 3-ply thick with an inner layer of mesh. So sometimes it can be a little difficult to cut it to length. So let me show you the trick. You're going to cut 2 rings right next to each other and then cut through the inner mesh with some scissors and then start the tear. Just pull it all the way around. And trim to fit. Next, you got the hose clamp. Now, you can't put the hose clamp on the tear. You have to go 1 full ring down. There's the hose clamp. Tear is 1 full ring down. And then here on the flange, you can see that there's 2 rings. This is what you put the hose clamp between, and that way it helps seal the ducting. Work it on slowly because sheet metal's sharp. Get the hose clamp over the first ring and before the second one, then just tighten it down.
One more thing just for fun, because my customers always ask me if they should be sucking or blowing the air through their hoods and their filters. And I want you to see why, from the perspective of the fan, that doesn't matter. So I attached a piece of thermoflow ducting, 1 piece, to both ends of this fan. And let's see which works better. Oh wait, it can't pull more than it can suck, right? Or all the air would get sucked out of the room and everything would collapse into one of those little black holes that Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner are always battling over. So, from the perspective of the fan, it doesn't matter if you push or pull, and it's exactly the same thing with a sealed room. You can only blow out the same amount of air you suck in, and you can only suck in the same amount of air you blow out, which is why you can't have a sealed room and use your house AC. But we'll get into that later.
Remember though, that's only with respect to the fan, because there are other considerations that will guide your venting decision, like whether you're going to suck or blow through the hood. And even though the fan can only blow out what it can suck in, you can clearly see that the ducting on the intake side does not respond like the ducting on the exhaust. Just look at how the ducting collapses on this side and not on the exhaust side.
Because if the suck side of the fan is going to have more ducting, that would be bad. Because not only does the inside volume of the ducting shrink on the suck side, when the space between the metal rings collapse, it creates turbulence, and the air inside the ducting bounces around more, which has the effect of reducing total airflow. And the slower the air, and the more time it spends in the ducting, the more time it has to dump its heat back into your room. That's why most of the time you try to avoid attaching ducting on the suck side of your fan, especially in the bigger grows. And that's also why you want thermoflow ducting, because thermoflow ducting is 3-ply thick, and it has that black inside lining that helps insulate it and keep the heat in the ducting instead of radiating back into your garden.
But in your world, when you're venting a tent or two in your house, none of this matters, because you're not going to lose enough airflow to make a difference. Seriously, we're talking about what? 10 feet worth of ducting, and this Vortex 6-inch fan is rated at 400 CFM after 20 feet. Believe me, there are far more important and very real things for you to micro-focus on first, Mr. Builder. Besides, venting more air is never the right answer, but I'll prove that to you later in the video. And while it doesn't matter to the fan if you're using it to blow or suck air, and while it doesn't matter to the filter if you're blowing or sucking air through it, and while it doesn't matter if you're using a 16 bulb T5 Nickel City bad boy like this, or a K5 Kind 750 LED like this, it absolutely does matter when you're venting a hood like this, because if the fan filter is inside the tent, when it blows out, that fan is going to pressurize the ducting and the hood, and any leaks, whether that be from where you attach the ducting or from the hood seal, any leaks from there is only going to blow hot air back into your tent and onto your plants.
And what do I always tell you is the #1 mid-flower crop killer? That's right, duct failure, because you didn't understand its value and you cheaped out and you bought the $10 aluminum foil shit instead of the 3-ply thick 100% blowout proof guaranteed thermoflow ducting. Trust me, thousands of growers come through my store, and the last thing you want is a mid-flower blowout that cooks your crop, because when you come home and you find all your plants hanging limp and dead, you are going to be so sad, so very sad, especially when you knew better, because you read my books and my No More Grow More fact cards and watched this video.
But if everything is sealed up, then no problem. And remember, when you add CO2 to this setup, since we are venting the room, you would make sure to keep the plants between the CO2 source and the vent. And even though I don't think I should have to say it, you do know when the fan filter is inside the tent, you can only blow out with it, right? Which is also why I tell you, if your garden is sealed, how can your house AC blow any air into the room if no air can get out? And later, when you're done watching this video and you're sitting in your garden getting high, think about that. Now let's move the fan filter to the outside of the tent and connect it to the hood through this port. And we're still going to make sure that the other side is going out through this port so the tent is sealed just like before. Yep. Well, now we've created a sealed garden, and no longer will any air be removed from or added to the tent, because now the fan filter is outside the tent. Just look at the smoke going through the other side of the ducting. But now that the garden is sealed, you're really going to have to commit to the project, because you're going to need to control everything now, which means you're going to have to add CO2, cool the air, and control the humidity, which gets to be a bit much and expensive for a project of this size. Because if you don't vent and you don't control the heat, you are going to fail. But if you do decide to add a second fan to exhaust the tent, then why did we bother creating a sealed room by moving the fan filter out of the tent in the first place? And here's another one of those things builders do. You guys will buy one fan to blow the air out of the room and a second fan to blow air into it. And I know like 1 out of 15 of you have done something like this or are currently doing something like this. But there is absolutely no point, because a fan can't blow out what it doesn't suck in, and it can't suck in what it doesn't blow out. So using a fan to pressurize the room and another to depressurize it is a rookie move, especially when venting more air is never the solution. Anyway, there are a couple more things I want to address about venting the lights in a sealed garden. And the first thing is heat. And I know you think you have to worry about the heat from your ballast, but the truth is the glass in your hood is the second hottest thing in your garden. Think about it. Why is your car 140 degrees when it's only 100 outside? It's because the glass converts light into heat, which is why you put that window shade up, right? That's also why it's 15 degrees cooler in the middle of a park than it is in the parking lot. And it's because the plants absorb and convert some of that light into sugar instead of heat. And yes, the glass gets really hot, but we can't remove it in a sealed garden where we're blowing through the hood, or the hot air would just blow back into the tent. And even if we flip the vortex fan over so it was sucking from the hood instead of blowing through it, if we remove the glass, the air in the tent would get vented, and once again our sealed garden would no longer be sealed. That's why it's tough and expensive to do a sealed garden like this at the home grower level. We most certainly can remove the glass though if we want to vent. And if we are going to vent, we could also remove this piece of thermoflow here, because we'll no longer be venting or sucking from the outside. But once again, the fan filter would need to be outside the tent, right? But before we get into that, there are a couple of more things I want you to know about venting your tent, and the first is this. If this 200 CFM fan can't cool the light, and I don't care if you're using a 400, 600, or 1000 watt light, if this 200 CFM 6L Vortex fan can't cool the light, an 8-inch fan isn't going to work any better, and neither will a 10-inch fan. And that's because at this point, more air isn't going to solve the problem. And here's why. If you look at the system it's blowing through, it's got what? Maybe 5 cubic feet of ducting and 3 cubic feet in the hood? So let's say 10 cubic feet worth of ducting and hood. And if this fan blows 200 CFM, that means it entirely replaces all the air in the system about 20 times per minute. That's every 3 seconds. It entirely vents the air in the ducting system and the hood every 3 seconds. So do you really think by putting an 8-inch fan here and venting it every 2 seconds, or a 10-inch fan and venting it every second, is going to make that much of a difference? And that's because fans don't cool anything. They only remove heat. And it doesn't take nearly the amount of air you think it does to remove as much heat as possible. Which is why I told you earlier, hanging the fan filter from the roof is worthless, because of venting all the air from your hood every 2 seconds and all the air from the tent every 10 seconds doesn't solve your heat problem. Hanging the fan filter from the roof isn't gonna magically change anything. What you should be more concerned about is the sheet metal that these hoods are made from, because if aluminum foil can go from like 450 degrees to room temperature in like 1 second, then think about these hoods because this little hood is like 5 square feet of radiant sheet metal times all 18 hours of veg or 12 hours of flour. And this hood here is like 10 square feet of radiant sheet metal plus all that glass times all those hours your light is on.
And since we're already here, we might as well test some equipment. I mean, I've got the store and the equipment, right? So let's do that. Let's test different equipment in different configurations, and let's see where that takes us. And let me show you how we're going to do that.
Okay, let's take a moment and let's go over our test tent, and let me introduce you to all the different components. I've got a table that's face up, and the reason that you'll see blue tape on everything is because the instructions for the gun like it when you hit the same thing, the same mark, the same material over and over to get the most consistent result. And I've got a thermometer hanging up over here. I've got a digital thermometer up here, and I have this thermometer upside down so the metal part that changes the temperature is facing the light. I've got a wrench here so we can see if the light is going to heat up the wrench anymore like your car in the sun. We're going to go ahead and test the tent. We'll test the hood. We'll test the glass, has tape on it. And then when we start venting, we're going to test the ducting on its way in and out too. That way we get a pretty good reading of all the different things that are going on in the tent. Okay, so for this test, let's do a baseline. We're going to keep the store at 80 degrees. So the temperature in the store is 80. You can see thermometer 80, 83, 83, 83, 83, 83. All right, so our baseline temperature statically was 83 degrees. I've got a 1,000 watt light on now, and we're gonna zip up the tent, and let's just see how hot it gets without venting. Ooh, it's hot. You can feel the hot air come out right when you open the doors. All right, let's take a quick look. 110 directly underneath the light. 1.9 on the tape, 1.9 on the wrench, 107 on the vortex fan, 95 on the filter, 92 on the side of the tent, 133, 122, and on the glass, 194. It says it's 93 above it and 109 behind it, the door, 110. So worst case scenario, no venting, no insulation, glass in the hood, fan on in the room, about 110. Now let's go ahead and vent it. Okay, so we've been venting for an hour now. Let's take a look at the tent. 100 on the back, 88 on there. This is 92. The table's 96. The wrench is 94, 86, 87, 90, 88. All right, now let's move the fan filter outside the tent. But we're gonna run the hood through the other side of the tent too. So we're gonna create a sealed garden here, just like when we did the first test where we didn't vent anything. And now let's see what it looks like just venting the hood, but not the inside of the tent. All right, we've been venting for an hour now. It says it's 95, 92, 95, 96, 86, 90, 89, 115, 86 is our airflow in. All right, we're gonna take out the glass, flip the fan over so we're sucking from the hood, and let's see what that tells us. All right, so the back wall says 104. Woo! 96, 88, 86, 87. So the room temperature went up when we removed the glass, but the hood temperature and the thermoflow ducting temperature went down. Now let's insulate the hood and see what happens. Okay, right away the room's a little cooler. It's 102, it says 86, it's at 96 still, 84, 90, 84, 101. This thing's 87 degrees because all of the heat that was in the hood stays in the hood and the exhaust stream now because of the insulator, and then it gets dumped out of the tent. Now, I'm going to show you just how extreme that is. I'm going to put the glass back in the hood, and that way you can see like just how much that heat, that insulator is going to save you. Okay, now this is glass in, vented through, sealed garden. The room temperature, 91, 87, 92, 89. This says 81, 83, 84, 80, 124. That's a big drop on the glass. Okay, this is with the 600L from Vortex. It only pulls 200 CFM. The room is 91, 84, 86, 89, 85. All right, just for fun, let's try some Kind LEDs and some Nickel City lights too, and see what kind of a heat load they put off. A Kind LED 1000. And is it expensive? Yes, compared to a light, but it's been on for an hour now, and it is not that hot at the tent. No venting, 95 degrees. The temperature, 94. The table's 102. The metal wrench is 102. The tent's 89. The metal is 105. Back here it's 102. 102. You can touch the bulbs, it's so cool in here. Okay, let's put a Nickel City T5 light in here now and see how much heat load that produces. Ooh, this one got a little warm. Not as warm as the HPS, but definitely warmer than the LED. Now this is the 16 bulb Nickel City T5. The room is 100, 100, 98, 90, 115.
Which is why I say these types of lights, like the Nickel City Bad Boy T5s and the K5 series from Kind, like T5s and LEDs are perfect for the home grower that just wants to grow weed for themselves, right? I mean, who needs that extra heat and hassle of an HID bulb if you don't want the weight or the hassle of venting and the expense of cooling the air? But I also want you to remember that yield is based on light. And while you might be able to tell indoor bud from outdoor bud, you cannot tell 400 watt bud from 1000 watt bud. And that's because quality is based on grower talent, not the lights you buy or the equipment you use.
One more thing about fans while we're here. This is a centrifugal fan, and it may not blow a lot of air right here at the end of it, but at the end of 20 feet of ducting, it's killing it. And while this 6-inch fart snatcher duct fan might claim 200 CFM, that's 200 CFM right here at the end of it, because I assure you, it's not 200 CFM after 20 feet of ducting. Seriously, don't confuse a centrifugal fan like this Vortex with a blade fan like this duct fan. They don't move air the same way, and they don't produce the same results. And you probably aren't going to need anything more than a 4 or 6-inch Vortex fan to vent a couple of tents like these in your house. Before I show you how to vent bigger tents like these, there are still a couple of things we should go over about the filters first. Like, how much fan filter do you really need? Because once you understand the relationship between venting, cooling the air, and the air flow, it starts to drive down the cost of growing weed, and it unlocks a whole bunch of other options, which we'll get to later in the video.
And if you want more information about watts, weight, and rotations, or how to figure out how much light you really need to get that desired yield, well, you can read all about that stuff in my grow book and equipment guide and my No More Grow More Fat cards, or you can watch my videos on 1, 2, and 3 light rotations here on YouTube, or you can switch over to the hydrochannel.com.
So, before we get back to venting 2 tents like this, let's go over the differences between pushing and pulling the air through the filter.
And the best place to start is with what's in it. And it's charcoal, just like the charcoal in a fish tank filter. Sure, there are different grades of charcoal, and that might be reflected in the cost and quality of the filter, but they all work in exactly the same way. The pores on the surface of the charcoal capture the odor molecules as they pass through. It filters the air just like it filters the water. And of course, the slower the air, the more time it spends in contact with the charcoal, and the more odor gets filtered out. Which is why my Grow Book and my No More Grow More cards show you exactly that. A small fan on a big filter works way better at capturing those odor molecules than a big fan on a small filter. And why I always tell you the one and done vent like this requires way more filter and way less fan than a garden recirculating the same air over and over like this. Because if you're venting a one and done situation, you only have that one shot at removing the odor molecules. You probably want a bigger filter with a smaller fan because you want that extra contact time before it forever leaves your garden. Remember, the slower the air, the greater the contact time, the better the chance the odor gets filtered out.
But if the pores in the carbon catch the odor molecules, then humidity would surely clog them as they become saturated with water. So you can see why blowing humid garden air into your filter might affect it. But then I only bring that up because I want to make this point. If your fan is completely exchanging the air in the tent every 5 seconds, I don't think humidity buildup is ever going to be a problem. Besides, humidity evaporates, and since charcoal is made from heat and pressure, and they use this stuff in fish tanks, I really don't think the heat from your light or the humidity from your plants is gonna matter. Unless the particles and the fine dust in the air that gets filtered out with the pre-filter clog the charcoal, which they will. So if you are going to blow air into your filter like this, just make sure to put the pre-filter somewhere else in the airstream, like over the end of the intake here. That way the air gets filtered before it even gets to your hood, which will cut down on having to clean that too. Or you could put the pre-filter between the fan and the filter here like this. And while it may not filter the air before the hood, it will filter the air before it gets to the carbon. Besides, if you're doing this, you probably don't have the glass in your hood anyway, so it doesn't matter. And since we also proved that venting more air doesn't help, we can probably also switch from a 6-inch to a 4-inch vortex, which will not only be quieter, but the filter will be more effective because slow air filters better.
And I want to go over one more thing in terms of the life of the filter. Since we already proved the fan can only blow out what it can suck in, and that it doesn't matter if we blow or suck through the filter, let's compare different fans on the same filter now and see what happens.
So let's look at a couple of fan filter combos now, and let's start by comparing several different sized fans sucking from the same filter. That way we can get a baseline and something to compare and talk about. And then I'm going to show you something that'll blow your mind. Alright, so let's start with a 4-inch fan just for fun, and you can see not much smoke is getting absorbed. Nothing down here for sure. And listen to the sound the fan makes. Okay, so this is the Vortex 600L. It does about 235 CFM, and you can see it's starting to absorb the smoke. Not too much down here. Yeah, so we'll mark the 6-inch right about here. The Vortex 6L, 235 cubic feet. All right, now this is where it starts to get interesting. Just listen to the difference in that fan. That's a lot more motor. And you'll notice the diameter on the Vortex 6 is much bigger than the 600L. So this fan's doing 400 and about 50 CFM. And that's a big difference already. This is where the 6L left off. Look at that. Just about all the smoke is getting absorbed. You can see it coming out of the fan. And I know you think there might be a leak right here, but look. Nothing in particular, right? Like nothing that you'd notice. But it sure does pull a lot further, another 200 cubic feet, right? That seems to be about its sweet spot right there. All right, this is the Vortex 8-inch. And at 750 CFM, you can really see the difference. Right? The smoke's much further away. It's pulling all of it in. I ran that blue tape down so you could get a visual reference on it. And it's pulling it all the way down to here. Okay, so this is the Vortex 8-inch inline. It's just an 8-inch smaller than the 10. You can really hear the difference. And just like a duct fan doesn't move air the same way a centrifugal fan does, the Vortex jet fan doesn't move air the same way the Vortex centrifugal fan does. Okay, so what have we learned so far? We've tested the 4, 6, and 8-inch fans. We even tested that 8S, which pulls as much as the Vortex 10. You can see way down here, right? But it doesn't pull all the way down. There's this gradient. It pulls mostly here, a little less here, and finally the less at the bottom. And we're not even all the way down to the bottom. Now, the 10-inch Vortex approaches about 900 cubic feet, right? So it makes sense, because if we look at what the Pro 150 is rated for, it's 1300 CFM, and it gives you a contact time. So those fans are too small for this. Sure, the filter will last longer, but you're not really using the filter, which is why Vortex came up with the reversible filter. So now, all we have to do to go from an 8 to a 10, take out the top ring, put the 10-inch ring in, lock it down, put our fan on it, and we're ready to go with the appropriate filter. All right, this is the 10-inch fan. Listen to it. All right, this is the S10 series. It's 1135 CFM, and you can see the smoke's getting sucked in all the way down here. That's a big difference than the other ones. And remember, the S series doesn't pull air. It doesn't make air the same way as the V series. All right, so this is the Vortex 6-inch 450 cubic foot fan blowing into the filter. And even here, you can already tell it's blowing it all the way down to the bottom, because blowing into the filter is not the same thing as sucking from it. Now, with an 8-inch fan, it pulls all the way down to here, but still, like the top 5% of the filter is doing 95% of the work. Which is exactly why I used to tell you to wrap the top third of your filter in plastic like this after a year or so. Because most of you are using like a 4, 6, or 8-inch fan, right? Like a Vortex, just the V series. So this filter would have been plenty enough, right? And if the top 5% is doing 95% of the work, then after a year, if you wrapped it like this, the filter should be new again, right? And that's also why I always told you to buy more filter than you needed. But now, with Vortex's new reversible system, that's not true anymore. This seems silly. And we're doing this used to be an excellent place to save yourself some money. Today's filters are so cheap, and they're so awesome, and the charcoal works for so long, especially when you buy a little more filter than you need.
The same is not true, however, if we flip the fan over and blow into the filter. Now you can really see the difference, yeah? Now it blows air all the way out to the bottom. In fact, the better filters even have a little cone down there to help to keep the airflow laminar. See, when you blow into a filter like this, it spreads the air throughout the entire filter in a way that sucking from it doesn't. And while this is a much more effective way to use the filter, it certainly won't last as long, and sooner rather than later. You're going to catch a whiff of your garden when you walk up to your door. You know what I mean.
And for the record, builders be warned, I will not sell you loose charcoal to refill your carbon filters with, you cheap fucks. These things are mechanically shaken and packed at the factory, and there is no way I am bringing in a case of dirty carbon into my store just so you can save $15. I would rather give you a sick deal on a new one if you're that committed. Besides, these things aren't that expensive anymore, and they're awesome. Okay, this is a vortex filter, and now let me show you why I used to tell you to wrap your filters in the top third with plastic, and you're going to be like, oh shit, why doesn't every manufacturer do that, right? The vortex filters are now reversible. All you have to do is take the top end cap off, lean it back, take the bottom end cap off, flip the filter over, put the end caps where the other ones used to be, and bam, brand new filter. Like, ta-da! Why doesn't every manufacturer do that, right? Because who the fuck wants to wrap their filter in plastic like this? And now it doesn't matter what filter you buy. You just buy the speed and the cubic feet per minute flow you need and the fan that matches it, and then you just put any one of their caps, a 12-inch, a 10-inch, an 8-inch, onto their filter. And if you want to move more air, because you're recirculating it over and over, all you have to do is get a bigger vortex adapter cap, put it on the filter, get yourself a bigger fan, and top it with a bigger 90. And since we know only the top 10% of the filter is actually being used, we also know that years down the road, when you start to catch whiffs of your garden, you could just pop the end caps off, flip the filter over, and get years more use out of it. And if you are using a filter in your final vent before you send your garden air out into the world, then when you start to catch whiffs of your garden outside your house, you should know you have to replace this filter. But that's okay, because this filter is not done yet. Now, just buy yourself a new one to replace that one, and take that one, and instead of throwing it away, just take the end caps off, flip it over, and instead move it inside the tent where it can finish its life out, scrubbing and recirculating the same air over and over. What? Growing weed is expensive and dangerous, and anywhere you can save some money, decrease exposure, or increase stealth is always worth taking advantage of. What? I love reducing costs. I can admit it, I got the OCD too.
And just to catch up on a point from earlier in the video, remember how I said there was nothing stealthy about a tent like this? Well, now that you know a duct fan can blow through a carbon filter, let's see how this little tent behaves if we switch to a 6-inch duct fan from a 6-inch vortex fan.
Not bad, right? And that's because you're venting properly now. And by properly, I mean the least amount of air necessary. In fact, done like this, it's actually even stealthy. I mean, except for the big black box and the fan filter in your living room with the occasional smell of weed.
Before we get back to venting though, I want to put the information we gathered about the fan filter together with the information we gathered about total airflow and heat removal to make one more point. If you really don't need to vent the area 20 times a minute for maximum heat removal, then I guess you really don't need to waste your money on these bigger, more expensive fans. You're always going to need lights, yes, and thermoflow ducting, yes, and a vortex filter, yes. But if you've got a small 1, 2, or 3 light Nickel City bad boy rotation, or a kind LED setup like in my videos, then I guess a 4-inch or a 6-inch vortex is all you really need. Okay, let's get back to venting again.
Alright, now we're looking at venting 2 tents. And it doesn't matter if it's a 400 watt veg in a 2x4 with a 600 watt in flower in a 4x4, or a 600 watt in veg in a 4x4 and a 1000 watt flower in a 5x5. And it doesn't matter if you use HPS, MH, T5s, LEDs, we're still going to vent a 2-light setup the same way, with a Y branch like this on a vortex fan filter like this.
And while it doesn't really matter if we leave the end of the ducting hanging in the tent with an LED, or in a tent with a Nickel City 16 bulb like this, or even if we attach it to the hood like this, we usually vent 2 tents with 1 fan filter and a Y like this. Now, let's move on to venting a 3-light rotation.
Ah, the 3-light rotation, my favorite. And if you're going to vent a rotation like this, well, we're left with few choices. You could buy 1 vortex fan filter for each tent like this, or you could buy 2 fan filters and set them up like this, with 1 fan filter for veg and the other divided between the 2 flower tents.
Or you could get all OCD about it and make an air pig like this from a cardboard box, so the ports divide up the fan equally.
But more importantly, if this 6-inch fan pulls 200 cubic feet, and if we divide that by 3 hoods and the ducting, or 30 cubic feet, that means this will pull all the air out of the hoods and ducting like every 10 seconds, or 6 times a minute. And if we were venting the tents, it would vent all 3 tents like every minute, which is still more than enough venting to remove as much heat as possible.
Now, if you still want more airflow for the 2 flower tents, and you may, because the lights are hotter, then all you have to do is reduce the veg side of this setup with a 6-to-4 reducer like this, or cover it with some aluminum foil like this.
Okay, before we go on to big tents like these, I want to go over a couple of things about air conditioners here, because there's a big difference between the 1-duct air conditioners like this and the 2-duct like this, because before you take it to the next level, you're going to have to know the difference between them. Okay, these are the 2 different basic types of air conditioners. There's the 1-duct air conditioner and the 2-duct air conditioner. And yes, there are splits and mini splits and window air conditioners, but they all fit into the 2-duct category of air conditioners. So, once you understand the difference between these 2, you'll understand how those work. And while these 2 air conditioners may look similar from the outside, and while they may both claim to cool about 10,000 BTU, and they both claim to use about 1,000 watts of electricity, the real difference between them is back here with the ducting. Let me show you what I mean. This is a 1-duct AC, which means it only has 1 fan. And because there's only 1 fan, it's tasked with 2 jobs: the cooling of the air and exhausting the heat. That's why when we add smoke back here, it comes out both the exhaust and the supply. Then with the 2-duct unit, you can see all the smoke that comes in the back goes out the supply, and all the smoke that goes in the exhaust comes out the other side. But why is that? And why is that important to you? First, let me tell you why. Where the 1-duct AC only has 1 fan, the 2-duct AC has 2 fans. One that's responsible for recirculating the room air, and another that's responsible for venting the heat. That's why whenever you use a 1-duct AC like this, 30% of the air it sucks in is going to go out the exhaust. Which means if you put this AC in your garden, 30% of the air it sucks in is going to get vented, unfiltered, which doesn't sound like much until we do the math. If this 4x8 by 7 foot tall tent is 224 cubic foot big, and the fan on this 1-duct AC moves about 400 CFM, and 30% of that is vented through the exhaust duct, that means about 133 cubic feet a minute is being exhausted out of the tent. That also means this AC will entirely vent all the air in this tent every 2 minutes. Then, when you add in the fan that's venting the hoods, and even if you're only using the small 235 CFM Vortex 6L inline fan, you're still exhausting a 224 cubic foot tent at a rate of almost 400 cubic feet a minute. No wonder your garden won't cool down. You're venting the cold air faster than you can make it, right? because you're literally making it at a rate of 280 CFM and venting it from the tent at a rate of 400 CFM. And not only are you sucking all your cold air out, you're also emptying the tent faster than it can fill up. Let me show you what I mean. The tent's not even sealed, but the one duct AC is still venting. Now, let me show you what happens with the doors closed. You can already see the sides are starting to suck in. So what good does that do? Because now you're just sucking in hot air, right? Because a fan can't blow out what it can't suck in, and it can't suck in what it can't blow out. Which is why I say, and except in a very few specific situations, one duct ACs are worthless. And I say almost, because in a 2-light rotation like this, where we are venting the tents, but the one duct AC is not in the tent, and we're using a little 6-inch duct fan like this to pull the heat out, blowing cold air into the tents is perfect, because we're not exhausting the tent fast enough with this little fan to suck out the cold air the AC just made before it absorbs the heat. And if you want to turn your worthless one duct AC into this monster where it might actually be useful, all you have to do is cover the cold air supply with a squared around from any hardware store, attach some thermoflow ducting to it, use a Y or a T and split it into both tents. Seal the ducting to the adapters with a hose clamp like this, and then you've got cold air in your tents. And if you want a little extra boost, you can experiment with a 6-inch duct fan just like this one and put it in line here so it's sucking more cold air from your AC and blowing it into your tents. Awesome, right? You can use this one duct AC to cool a couple of tents in your garage or a shed. Think about it. Since you don't have to care anymore about this one duct piece of shit venting your 2,500 watt house air conditioner, all you have to do is take the cold air this thing makes and blow them into a tent. Just run this ducting wherever. That's why in a garage where the AC is outside of the tent, this works great. And you can get these things for super cheap. But again, there is a limit. The one duct AC only works up to about 1,000 watts because it vents its own air. But a 2-duct AC like this, or a window AC, well, that'll definitely cool about 2,000 watts because they're more efficient, because they don't vent their own air. You would still want to filter the garden with a vortex fan filter setup like this though. And remember, you want to push the cold air into the tent at the lowest point possible and vent from the highest point possible. And it's not because heat rises, it's because you want the cold air to have as long as possible to absorb the heat before it gets sucked into the hood and vented. That's why I told you back in the beginning, the proper way to vent is the least amount of air necessary, not the most. And that's also why I told you putting the fan filter on the roof doesn't vent any more heat. And all that's great, unless you consider the cost of electricity. Because if you've got a 400 watt veg and a 600 watt flower, and you add 1,000 watt AC to that, you're gonna double your electricity cost, whether it's a 1 duct or a 2 duct. And while we're talking about electricity, I want to point out one more thing because I want to explain to you what I mean by adding more air conditioner. So here are two 2-duct air conditioners. This one costs about $500 and this one about $2,000. And yet they both claim to cool about 10,000 BTU and draw about 1,000 watts of electricity. But the reality is, this is a professional unit and it will cool about 6,000 watts and a CO2 burner. And that's because for the same 1,000 watts of electricity, this AC removes something like 25 degrees a pass at 900 CFM, while this little one removes 15 or so degrees a pass at 280 CFM. Think about that. For 4 times the money on the buy-in, you get like 5 times the efficiency. And that's a big difference as the minutes and hours and days and weeks roll by. And it actually gets even better because this big AC only uses 960 watts and this little one uses 1,300. which is also why I tell you, if your 2-duct AC can't cool the lights in an efficient sealed garden like this, the solution is always a bigger AC and never more vented. Okay, one more thing about the super efficient 2-duct air conditioner before we move on to the bigger tents, and it's this. Just like filtering the same air over and over reduces total odor count, the 2-duct AC benefits from cooling the same air over and over, which is not only going to save you money on the AC side of things, but it also means you can more efficiently add CO2. And remember, you always want to add CO2 because it's part of the photosynthesis equation and can increase yields by up to 25%. The AC can only increase your electrical expense.